Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for joining our weekly work from home webinars. This is actually going to be our final in the spring installment, I guess, as we are starting to see people return to work and or maybe finish their school year, albeit virtually, and head out into the mountains maybe and get off the grid. But thanks again for joining us. So today we're going to talk more around just end-to-end integration and if I can get just a confirmation my slides are moving along. I think they are, but on the agenda today, again, wanting to talk around a seamless CRM platform with integrations. It always comes down to the customizations, the extensions, the integration story. So how do you get that right? What are you trying to achieve? And so I think for us, we'll just talk quickly through the whole concept and maybe the idea of getting that 360-degree view of the business. I'll expand it beyond saying just the customer, the holistic view of the customer, but the broader business and how does that look? What does automation look like, and where and how do you get started with that, and how does that become I'll say a continuous improvement process and growth on the automation path? And then I think what we did is just to give you a bit of a quick hit list and maybe some points you can consume relatively simply on your own is we've called out what we believe are 15 key integration points that can help improve your business processes around your business apps and provide a more seamless front to back experience with tighter integration across the organization. So with that said, how integration works to provide a 360-degree view of your business. As we were going through this, we originally were looking at this in the lens of saying having just your customer as part of that 360-degree view, but realistically how about the business as a whole, and thinking just around the digital feedback loops. I think if you've been watching some of the previous content, maybe double back a week or two, we've had it in here thematically a week over week, which is the whole concept of digital feedback loops from employees, customers, products, and operations, and how do you share that information and make data flow from one area to another? Integration simply is the answer, right? So and just a couple ideas here for some things to think about. And as we know here more so than ever, there's no shortage of data. I think the challenge is how do you actually leverage that data and make it something useful. So this is one stat we dug up here from IDC that we thought to be of interest. While we know that 90% of the world's data has been generated within the last 3 years, and there's no slowing down there, only 1 to 13% of it was transformed into something of action to better serve customers. So I guess the high level message is, what are some of the simple steps you can take to filter out some of the noise that's inevitably going to be there, and how do you start to create some logical system and logical flow around the business? So just to call it out here in terms of tasks, this has a CRM flavor around this, but I mean, really this is more broadly applicable to the business as a whole with any task. I'm maybe a little more hardliner of sorts on this. I think if there's something you're doing more than twice, maybe you should be automating it. But here are some simple things to think about and ways you can maybe at least get started in terms of doing some data entry and reporting, are simplified things that if you know the data source that's coming into a system, let's say for example a dynamics for sales scenario where we know we have our marketing data. Well, maybe it's easy if that's flowing in an automated fashion as people register or hit a landing page or new leads come in. How do we trigger notifications to the appropriate place, to the appropriate person, so that they can take the appropriate action within the appropriate time frame? Overusing the word appropriate, but I think you get my drift. Once you've kind of gotten the foundational pieces and some of those rudimentary aspects around data entry and reporting, so on the front side, data coming in, on the back side, measuring and analyzing, where do you go next? What are some things you can look to do, and what are some ways to become a little more efficient in your processes? These are 4 areas we've just called out that you can think about, and obviously, depending on the context and nature of your business, these 4 areas are going to be either more or less applicable, or they're certainly going to take on their own flavor, and just in how they look. So I think one area for us in terms of that project and job management, and we'll say, kind of lumping those 2 things together, and maybe that's not fair, but for broader conversation's sake, putting those 2 together. So how do you bill time against a project, push appropriate notifications, tell people what's happening next, communicate timelines as they shift, track budget in an ongoing fashion in an automated way. So certainly some things you can think about there, and in terms of automating those, just a very simple example would be a project manager making an update into some project plans, and then those notifications being pushed out across multiple people. Business development scheduling, a simple one, even just with a calendar notifications. A lot of people, you probably notice it pop up on the bottom of their calendar, book time in their schedules. That can start to trigger a bunch of different, lead and opportunity orchestration processes behind the scenes, things like that. Online forms, it's relatively simple and an easy way to just start the data inflow process, we'll say, in a well-positioned online form with the right questions and the right rules and parameters around it, and support. So both of those, I'll say, there's some good opportunities to make those more self-service in nature, whether you're surfacing that up within a portal experience as part of a website or through social channels. And if, again, you want to double back to some of the earlier content we did over the course of the spring around some of the social automation pieces, or some of the portals or customer service web sessions we got into further detail around that. So where and how does this all start to come together, and what can you wrap your head around? If you certainly look into the Microsoft side of things, where they're talking about their ongoing open data initiatives and working with even some of what I'll say is maybe their traditional competitors in SAP and Adobe, they want to arrive at this common data model and a common data service. So we're already seeing that in a number of ways here, but one, just in terms of putting a visual out there, tying it back to a use case, I think these are some of the multiple channels you're probably interacting with, or if you're not interacting with, you could be interacting with both potential people that you're working with as customers, or maybe some of your internal stakeholders. But these are your multiple channels. So I guess kind of a thought-provoking question that was thrown out, or we've seen thrown out our direction in some of the conversations we've been having, is how do you present an omni-channel experience in across multiple channels? So differentiating between omni-channel and multi-channel. You need to be present on all multiple different fashions and formats for people to engage with you, but how do you present a unified message, and how do you push data from spot to spot in an automated and seamless fashion? That becomes the multi-million-dollar question, to be able to provide that unified and omni-channel experience to people. So getting into the 15 things that and I promise you it's not as daunting of a drill down here, but we know, at least I know personally, people love to consume lists in terms of, you're scrolling through content and just trying to get a bulleted list of action items or things to look at. So we've broken it down into kind of thematic areas here, but getting into the list, number one for us, it always seems to be the ease of use around the integration between your CRM or finance or accounting platform and your inbox. So being able to work seamlessly within your email experience as information comes in from clients, product quotes, etc. Just working with all that seamlessly within your email client. Sure, email is maybe diminishing over time with the ongoing proliferation and integration of chat-based culture and chat apps like Teams and WhatsApp and what have you. But it's certainly not going to be going away. So how do you leverage that? Lumped in with that, calendar integrations. I don't know about anyone else, but if it's not on my calendar, it's not happening. So how does that, how do you make sure there's clean alignment there between the calendar and your business systems? Those would be a couple of the two that I think that I rely upon most heavily, where we're just to get through my day. Some of the other around connector integrations where you can create some custom and automated workflows for specific tasks that are happening in your day. So someone's booking time off and there's a implication to a project, for example, I'm notified that with that as a one, the person is a direct report, so I either approve or deny the time off, but then I can also in an automated fashion reallocate resources to a project, just as a sample scenario for you. Moving on, engagement and communications, more on the marketing, social side of things. I think we see a lot of this being driven from the, at least, kind of looking through the lens of the Microsoft Dynamics product stack around the LinkedIn acquisition a few years back now, and what that whole LinkedIn integration side is driving. There are a number of things, for example, just around the social media content scheduling and some social lead gen aspects where there's a number of good ISVs, independent software vendors out there that are built to suit or have open API webhooks where it's easy to hook in to a core CRM platform. One, for example, that we've found some good success with, you might want to look at, is Social Horsepower. But then the other piece, we've tagged Teams communication here. I'll say there's some good linkage with Microsoft Teams, and that's continuing to evolve, but just working in a more chat-oriented fashion, and certainly leveraging the bot framework within Microsoft Teams to query back and forth with Dynamics or pull information out without having to go into CRM, as the old way of maybe thinking is. Events. Certainly in the last 3-4 months here, we've seen no shortage of need to re-architect our thinking around what the definition of an event is, how people are engaging via web sessions just like this, with video, even just simple team meetings over video. So leveraging two areas here, we've called out events and just broader video integration. I think there are a number of ISVs that are out there that you can start to think about how to improve that whole overall experience with, I'll say, with just the event, just first of all, broadening the context of what the definition of an event is. And then secondly, the automation of standing up an event, tracking registrants, et cetera, et cetera. Website integrations, I think a lot of people are already kind of thinking in this fashion as well. Certainly the whole live chat and virtual agent aspects are pieces you can and should be thinking about as a self-serve mechanism, or at least a means to address some of those repetitive 100 level self-serve type of customer support questions, or even technician servicing type of questions. So some good possibilities there. E-commerce, I know that means something different to everyone, but certainly a lot of extensibility where you're seeing the Shopify's and other virtual e-commerce platforms come online, and just how do you integrate that to your core business records so that your data is clean and there is a unified MDM strategy. Landing pages and web forms, so how do you start to capture more information from people earlier on in the process and then nurture them along the journey. We flagged just as a bonus here, I guess we have 16, so portals. I'd suggest double back to the session we did. You want to hop on our site under the webinars section, you'll see more information about the portals piece, but short story there, I think we're finding more and more just certainly blending, and it's becoming very much one ubiquitous experience between the web and a portal. So just take a look further on that. I think it was about 2 weeks ago. Beyond that, additional data services. So forms, I've already mentioned kind of forms, data collection. I'll service up one example, like a data integration service, something like a Dun & Bradstreet, where on the front end, their marketing data is aggregated from their as a service, they provide clean, hygienic, and up-to-date data for companies with which you either are doing business or are targeting to do business, ingesting that into your platform in an automated fashion, and then keeping it up to date in an ongoing fashion where they can do things like credit risk analysis and other things like that. I'll skip over just to the proposal and document. There are a number of different ways you can look to add on in terms of, obviously the whole core concept, especially on the front side of your business of a CRM, is to basically lay out your proposal and quoting process. But how do you get that turned around as fast as possible? Looking at tacking on things like e-signature and those types of services, or even configuring a product configurator, a pricing quoting template, depending on the nature of your business. So I think that kind of concludes things, and certainly is a bit of what we wanted to position this for everyone is a concluding piece of content for the webinar series we've laid out over the last 3 months. Really, at the end of the day, it comes down to tightly integrated business systems, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it's a journey that you need to work at incrementally over time. I think it sounds cliche, but the old Chinese proverb about planting a tree, the best time was 20 years ago, so next best time is today, and just stick at it. Here's just a list of resources we're trying to make available for folks, and if you do want to chat further on any of this stuff, we'd be happy to help you however we can. With there, I guess maybe we'll pause for some questions. Do we have any questions in the chat, Kendra?
We do. Let me just take a look here. Okay. So here's one here. How will conflicting data be managed during integrations of applications into my CRM or like other applications?
Okay, so more of an single source of truth. What's the master record? Data integration always becomes the first piece. I would say maybe I'll give a short answer now, but I will say off the hop, double back to our session we did last week around master data management and data as a service. There might be some additional pieces of content in and around there, but certainly identifying what the single source of truth or what the customer master record is. And I think hopefully when deployed well over time, and taking advantage with what a lot of the common data, that's the whole guiding principle of the common data model, right? Is you have one common unified database, and then you're surfacing up a different modified experience of that database based on role in an app-based experience. So if Kendra, if you're working in the marketing app and I'm working in the finance app and another person's working in a project-based app, we're still working with that one core record. So that over time becomes less of a problem. I mean, getting there and getting all of the data in the first place takes some thinking, but when done properly around a common data service, that problem becomes an issue of the past. Any others?
Awesome. Yeah, we do have a couple more here. So one of them is, do you have any suggestions for how to govern your data?
That's a bit of a broad question, but certainly depends on your industry and your requirements. What are you required and complied to do from a legal point of view in terms of records retention and those types of things? But in terms of just within your own, I'll say within your own context of data governance for, say, your finance department or your HR department, find that, I'll say start with, if you have nothing at all, start with finding that person who's the key police officer, if you will, of following data protocols, records protocols, and standards. So making sure that things are up to date, and just empowering that person with a mandate to actually create a governance structure and a policy if one doesn't exist. The other pieces I would say maybe is just kind of within the core capabilities of, just for example with Dynamics, but I'm sure to some extent other CRM and ERP platforms, there's ability to create rules and create required pieces of information and optional pieces of information, and then just starting to create appropriate guidelines so that they capture all of the appropriate information but aren't too taxing at the same time.
Yeah, we have one more here. So it is, if we use our CRM to manage our marketing emails, will there be more of a risk that it will be blacklisted versus if we were to integrate fully?
So if you're working out of your CRM, I think there's some lessons learned, at least certainly for ourselves in the last 2 years, where we've found, we'll say that maybe a bit antiquated mindset of doing the bulk BCC, blasting it out, or using a kind of an off the shelf type of marketing automation solution, and keeping a larger and perhaps less than up-to-date list. That will be the number one thing that is punitive in terms of your delivery score. So data hygiene is that if there's one thing that will keep you from being blacklisted, I would say it's having an accurate list that you're mailing to in the first place and having as high as possible deliverability score. If there's a second thing, I would say maybe be cognizant of your messaging in relation to your target and make sure that you're using segmentation in some capacity to create a relevant message. And then third, I would say maybe think about the frequency of that relevant message. So I know there's certain things I receive on a daily basis, as good as they are, I just simply can't consume them every day. There's other things I receive at a somewhat more staggered and yet regular interval, and I find ways to consume them in a certain fashion. Maybe not all the time, but some of the time. So I think those would be some things to think about.
Awesome. Then my last question for you actually would be, what do you find is kind of coming up on the roadmap for the future that is integrative or innovative with what's going on with all these integrations and applications?
Well, I think you might see some more language around this whole concept of a customer experience platform, if you aren't already. And I think one thing just to maybe keep an eye on as it emerges here is the ability for organizations to push, location-based and contextually relevant marketing messages to you as a consumer based on where you're going. So, walking into a retail store, connecting via their Wi-Fi, and then that behind the scenes for wherever that retailer is, you're contributing to your own lead score in some way, shape, or form, and therefore then targeted and hopefully relevant and valuable offers are pointed your direction. But I think that's going to start to evolve over time. Thanks for throwing me a little hardball at the end there, Kendra. I appreciate that.
No problem.
Thanks again for everyone who's joined here on these web sessions. Honestly, feedback is more than welcome if you found them relevant, less than relevant, or anything in between. Happy to hear from you, good, bad, or otherwise. So thanks for that. And if you are in the vicinity, and I guess the definition of vicinity of Calgary for Stampede is obviously taken on a different complexion this year. But on July 9th, we're having our annual Stampede party. It's a little bit different this year. It's our non-Stampede Stampede party. So we are going to do a virtual conference here, and there's ability for you to join in, and we do have a bit of an agenda from 2 to 6 that afternoon. So there's a hybrid event, and if anyone is interested to a point, we're sticking within the provincial guidelines here for social gatherings and having a capped reduced number, so there is limited space. But if you do feel so inclined to pop out in person and you are in the Calgary area and want to go through the appropriate PPE, we'll have contact tracing with one of our partners, Cosmos Forms, checking everybody in to make sure that there's the appropriate contact tracing, and everyone will have a safe experience should they want to participate in person. But otherwise, we'll participate over. You saw the swap card logo a few slides earlier. They have a virtual hybrid platform. We'll have a band and try to replicate the Stampede experience as much as possible, because I know to Calgarians here, it is an important 10 days of July that is going to be a bit different this year. So with that said, thanks very much for everyone who's joined this afternoon. And if you have other questions, feel free to get in touch.